This show may contain adult language and themes. Listener discretion is advised. With that out of the way, let's start the show. You're listening to the Murder Is My Sign podcast, the only true crime astrology podcast, and I'm your host, Jordy Death, here to light your way through the true crime astrology storm. And in studio with me again, as always, I guess, is the last couple episodes at least, is Mr. Kyle.
Hey, how you doing?
So glad that you're able to join us yet again. I mean, at this point, it's almost like you're becoming my co-host, which is pretty freaking cool, at least I think.
Hey, I'm digging it.
Yeah, I am too. It's definitely helping at least me get through this particular batch of episodes with Columbine. And I know we were kind of talking about this before we started recording, but I've personally been kind of struggling getting through this because, I don't know, I think I'm over-identifying with it a little too much if I'm being honest, but then also I think it's just so...
Over-identifying with what?
With having been so young and living through that, and then also experiencing it myself as far as being on lockdown and being in active shooting situations and things like that. And then also these kids were like around our age. I mean, okay, yeah, this took place in 1999, but I mean, it's within our time span. It's within the realm of possibility of actually happening to us. Whereas, like, you know, when we were covering Hillside Stranglers, that was like in the 70s, and
I see what you're saying. That makes perfect sense.
Completely like different. And also that was like a serial killer where it was just like over the course of time, and whereas it's just, I mean, we're gonna get into this a little bit too with part 2 of the series, but like reading Dylan's journal and reading Eric's website, it's just, I personally empathize a lot more with Dylan because he was way more depressed and stuff, and like I'm a person who also writes in her journal all the time. Eric was just a fucking psychotic, hateful bastard. But I don't know. It's just it's just hard. And plus with everything else that's going on in the fucking world, It's just been, you know, a shitty stress show.
And it snowed today.
And it fucking snowed today. It's April the goddamn 9th, and it fucking snowed a little bit today.
Summer winter in Wisconsin.
Jesus, it's like Mother Nature's wanting to set the reset button.
Take me to that Wisco disco.
I've never heard that before. That's funny.
Bubbles Redka.
Oh!
Wisconsin discotheque.
Nice!
Take me to that Wisco disco.
That's awesome. Man. You know, I still have that CD that you gave me, and I listen to them like whenever they pop up. And they're really good. So, Bubbles Erotica, people, if you haven't heard them, go look them up. Alright, so last episode in part 1, we kind of talked about, you know, our memories of the event of when Columbine happened, and then also what kind of, I guess, prompted Eric and Dylan and who they were and stuff like that. Now, Eric was definitely the mastermind of...
That was, I distinctly remember that not being clear.
Yeah.
For quite a long time after. I mean, obviously, there was a lot of misinformation that came out later, but just at the time, I distinctly remember that it was just 2 kids who were fed up with life and the people around them.
Right.
But it's only after time that you started to realize that it was clear. It was clearly there was one kid who I think he was more suicidal than homicidal.
Right, and that was Dylan.
And he was following somebody who had a magnanimous, like not magnanimous, but just a huge personality, and somebody he could latch on to.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I actually just finished reading Dave Cullen's book Columbine, and I took a bunch of notes here, and one of them, he talked about how Dylan's personality and Eric's personality fed into each other. and I know we'll probably talk about this in the next episode, like when we get into like the compatibility astrologically speaking, but
wasn't that a lot of killer duos? Like one person's the alpha and the other person's sort of like the follower.
Kind of.
Like, wasn't it Lake and Ing, the two?
We'll be getting into those guys, I think, next month.
Oh, you're actually doing those?
Yeah,
guys?
I have the calendar behind me. It has all the people we're doing this year.
Lord.
So, but you have to go like month by month.
Right,
but yeah,
right.
They're definitely on my list. I don't know when we're gonna get them. It really will depend on if I can get like their complete natal chart information that I need.
Who was the British couple with the kids?
Wests.
Wasn't it like
Rosemary and Fred West?
One was more like the follower than like
well, I mean that's you're gonna find that in everything.
Right.
The instigator and then the propellant. So in David Cohen's book, he talks about the dynads. I think that's how you pronounce it. Dyad. Dyad. So they're murderous pairs who feed off each other. They account for only a fraction of mass murderers. Partnerships tend to be asymmetrical. You have an angry, erratic, depressive, and a sadistic psychopath that make a combustible pair. The psychopath is in control, and the hot-headed sidekick can sustain the excitement leading up to the kill. So in the book, it goes pretty in-depth about psychopaths and how Eric Harris was a true blue psychopath. He ticked off everything. Flying colors.
It's weird, though, because even for somebody who's almost 18... Oh, no, he was 18, wasn't he?
He was 18, so yes, he was very young.
They really... At least from the training I've had, it's about a decade out of date now, but I know they don't like to label that that early, even though some of the signs, you see them going back like in early childhood sometimes.
Yeah, and Dave Cullen even like talks about that, about how, I feel like this is going to be more like a book review, but seriously guys, if you're interested in Columbine and you really want the in-depth scoop, by all means, please go pick up a copy of Columbine. It came out 10 years after the event, and it is the end-all, be-all, I think, of...
I gotta say, I've read a little bit here and there, and even though when we're done with this, it's gonna go on my list of books to read.
Yeah.
Because it was staggering to me how much, like, I was just looking for general information.
Yeah.
And how I just kept reading it.
Right, and I think that's why I was, like, so kind of, like, frustrated in, like, the first episode, because I was just trying to skim through it, but, like, it's not a book you can skim through. It's a book that's gonna suck you in.
And the way it's structured...
Yeah!
It doesn't go in chronological order, so to speak. It jumps around. It's very...
But it jumps around in a way that makes sense. Because it's kind of like a time machine where it goes forwards and backwards, but it's topical, yes. I suppose. And he just released a new book on, I don't know if it was on Sandy Hook or Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
I'm not familiar with the second person.
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas was the 2017 Florida shooting.
Oh, right, at the
high school.
Yeah.
17 kids died in that one.
Yeah.
But
I don't recognize the name.
No, because everyone calls it Stoneman Douglas or whatever. But in that one, they actually captured the shooter. He did not kill himself. So, kind of going back to what we're talking about like the psychopathies, Dylan was obviously the depressive here. He was very unhappy with his life, and it's interesting because in all of his journals, up until like the month or so leading up to the attack, he was writing about love, about how he loved the idea of love, he wanted someone to love him back. And he was becoming very obsessive about this girl in school called Harriet. And I don't know if that was her actual name or if they assigned her a different name in the book. I don't remember that. But Dylan was all about love, like the unrequited love. Very much a poetic so, I feel. Whereas Eric was all about the hate.
Oh, yeah.
He fucking hated everything and everyone. He thought he was owed the world. And if you crossed him, you were on his list. And he was going to fucking kill you.
Yeah. I met a lot of people like that.
And it's crazy, too, because, so this was in 1999, so, in 97 and 98, the internet was still fairly new. People had, their AOL addresses, their IMs, and things like that. I think mine was, Punk Demon 48 back in the day. But...
At least you're consistent, my love.
Yeah, pretty much. It wasn't until I was in high school that everything became Jordy Death. Eric was very vocal about his hatred and his lists and stuff. And there is this person they keep bringing up, Brooks Brown and the Brown family. And originally, Brooks and Dylan were pretty close. And then he did something to really piss off Eric. And Eric just fucking flipped to the point where he started threatening Brooks and putting on his list. Like, he actually wrote this on his website. Like, I'm going to kill you. I hate you, blah, blah, blah. And someone saw this and reported it to the police. And they wrote it down and they printed off the pages.
I think I read that in Sue Klebold's book. Because I skimmed that one too. I'm probably not going to go back and read that one.
You know what?
Compared to this one.
Yeah.
But I remember her, like, she was describing the bomb squad and the SWAT team are going through her house.
Yeah.
And they're standing in the driveway, her and her eldest son. And another lady in the neighborhood was like, oh, you know, and something about, oh, you know, this Harris kid, his website. And she goes, why didn't you tell me he had a violent website? So, like, people knew. It wasn't like this came completely out of the blue.
Right.
At least the anger, like, on his part.
Right. Well, and the Harrises, too. Like, the Harris family, to this day, have not spoken, have not said anything, have not given any interviews. Whereas the Klebolds have been very forthcoming, very honest. And, I mean, I started skimming Sue Klebold's book as well, but I think after reading all of Columbine, I really don't feel the need to read that, which might be a little shitty, but at this point in time, it's like, I've gotten what I need to. I still understand, and, you know, my heart still goes out to her and Tom, and as well as Kathy and Wayne Harris, you know, to have to live with this. Because this is a big thing they talked about in the book, too, is that now that Eric and Dylan were dead, the parents were the next in line to get blamed. Yeah.
And, you know what, this might be irrational, but to some extent, they're not to blame. Because at the end of the day, what people do are their own decisions.
Right.
But you gotta wonder about some of the stuff.
Right. I mean? Well, because, like, Wayne Harris, he was ex-military.
Right. He was in the Air Force?
Yeah. Well, I don't really know if it matters what branch you have. I mean, they were all taking very active parts in their kids' lives and stuff, even, like, when they were going through, like, the whole diversion program. Right. Like, they showed up in front of the judge with their sons, and the judge actually made a point to point out that, like, this is the first time I've seen dads with their sons here. Yeah. Eric was such a brilliant liar and such a complete psychopath. He pulled the wool over everyone's eyes.
You know, I'm thinking that's why, rightly or wrongly, the Klebolds have reasons to talk publicly, because I think even a lay person that does a tiny little bit of investigation could see, yeah, he was there, right, but he was not the primer.
Right. Honestly, if anyone's to blame in any of this, it is Jeffco Sheriff Department. They fucked the pooch on this. They did a whole cover-up, because when Eric's website was reported, that was like the first instance that he was actually written down and in records. And then he and Dylan got in trouble. They stole, like, car parts and things like that.
Yeah, from a van, right?
From a van, yep, which got them into the diversion program and stuff like that. And then Eric was getting guns and getting all this stuff for pipe bombs. And the Brown family kept calling the cops on Eric Harris all the fucking time for every little threat and things like that. And there's this, like, one instance where I think Eric was getting into, like, a snowball fight, like, just, like, a kind of fun, like, little, you know, snowball fight between kids. And Judy Brown, Brooks Brown's mom, comes and picks up Brooks and says something to Eric, saying, you know, I'm going over to your house to talk to your mother, because he threw a snowball at her car or something. And he fucking flips and screams and then runs after the car and, like, is holding onto the car while she's driving. And she's, like, freaking the fuck out. And then she's trying to talk to Kathy Harris about what's going on. And it's just, like, I mean, I'm not a parent, but at what point do you just say, like, do you just, like, shove your kid off to, like boot camp or something, you know? Do you think they were, like, in denial?
Well, I'm not as educated on his family, because I just haven't done that much research.
There's hardly any research, though.
But it's like, you know, if he was as good a liar as everybody says he was, how do you know he wasn't snowing his family too?
Well, and he also...
You know, it's like, Mom, she's crazy. I would never do something like that.
Yeah,
like, you know
which is exactly, like, what he did. He even admits this in his journals, about how he was close to getting caught on various occasions. And then he just had to, like, lie through his teeth. And, like, he even complimented himself as to the fact that he was such a good liar. And, you know, we briefly talked about the basement tapes. And in the day of the shooting, Eric was actually sleeping over at Dylan's house. And then they videotaped their goodbye. They each said, like, don't hold our parents accountable. They gave us this life, but we're responsible.
The day of the shooting?
The day of the shooting. They woke up early, and they each recorded, or maybe it was the night before.
Because the only reason I asked is because I really did start reading the first chunk of Sue Klebold's book. And she said she heard Dylan get up. And, you know, she walked downstairs to see him, and, like, she's like, normally I had to get him out of bed for class, but he was all ready to go. And he was walking out the back door, or the front, whatever door, and he was like, he didn't tell me his day, and all he said was, bye! Like, in a super sarcastic, like...
Yeah, you know, no, that's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eric was just sleeping over. Or, they didn't really even sleep, I don't think. I think they stayed up all night. Just kind of juicing each other up. But the big thing is, like, in their, like, last video, they were saying that, you know, people are going to blame their parents, and they're not to blame. They gave them this life, but them, being Eric and Dylan, were the ones responsible for what they did with it.
And you know what, though? They said and did a lot of shit, obviously. Like, there was a lot of bullshit, but I have... At the end of the day, they made their choices.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You know, any inkling of what the parents may or may not have known is irrelevant, because at the end of the day, they made their decision and they did what they chose to do. And there's nobody's at fault but those two kids.
Right. Remember last episode, we were talking about how Eric was put on Zoloft and then eventually on Luxov, but we weren't sure what Luxov was.
Was it Levoxamine?
Levox. I don't know for sure if it's a Levoxamine. I'm sure it is. But it's actually an antidepressant that also suppresses anger.
Okay.
So that was also in the book. Okay, let's, I guess, just kind of start talking about the day of the event, I suppose. So Eric and Dylan woke up really early. I believe Eric was staying over at Dylan's house. And I don't even think they slept that night. I think they just stayed up the entire night. But by 5:30, Dylan was out of the house. And like you had said, he said bye to his mom. Now, by the time they pull up, so from now until about 11 o'clock when they pull up to the school, they're running in and doing things. They're filling up their propane tanks in these like big duffel bags, getting things ready. And they pull up into the parking lot. I can't remember what side they parked on. But someone parked in the junior side of the parking lot on one side of the building.
Because they had a sign, which is weird for a high school, that they had a sign parking.
Yeah, with how big this high school sounds.
Yeah, like I went to a pretty big high school, but we didn't have a sign parking. You parked wherever you could.
Right. I mean, we had like different lots, like junior lot and senior lot. But
no, we just had one big lot.
Oh, nice. So Eric parked on one side.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's what I was saying. I apologize. So they had assigned spots. And one of the other students, I remember she noticed that there's 3 spots for, like, the 3 people she knew.
Right.
One car was there, and then Harrison Klebold's cars were not there.
Because I believe it was Eric, Zach, and Dylan all had their cars together assigned. And Zach was there, but Dylan and Eric's were not. And Dylan, I think, was parked in the junior side, and Eric was parked in the senior side. So by, like, 11 o'clock, they roll up. And this part, I was just kind of rereading the book Columbine, and I don't know, like, when the script flipped, but I'll just kind of read this part. Brooks Brown walked out for a cigarette and spotted Eric in the parking lot, in the wrong lot. Brooks charged up to confront him about the test. By the time he got there, Eric had stepped out and was pulling out a big, hulking duffel bag. "What's the matter with you?" Brooks yelled. "We had a test in psychology." Eric was calm but insistent. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said. "Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home." Brooks thought that was strange, but he shook his head and walked on away from the school. He goes from, like, just fucking hating this dude to all of a sudden, you know, here's your opportunity to shoot him. And you're going to tell him to walk on by?
I'm playing God.
Absolutely.
It's like, you know, I could kill you right now if I wanted to, but I'm going to let you live. I mean, that's all supposition on my part, but who knows?
But you know what? I mean, it fits into the narrative because when we get to the library, he didn't kill everyone in the library. I mean, even that's where most of the people died. My also thought was that things were not in place yet, as far as, like, the bombs and things like that. So I figured, like, if he started shooting them now, it would just kind of, like, ruin the surprised, I suppose, because he had it down to like a science, like to the minute of like when the most amount of people would be in the cafeteria, because he thought his bomb was going to go off. He thought his car bombs were going to go off, but he was not very good at making bombs, which is probably a blessing.
Well, if I remember right, he was doing anarchist cookbook stuff.
Right. Yeah.
If you've ever seen those.
I've heard of it, but they've republished it in the sense where it's like, I don't want to say it's like misleading information, but it's not the original from the 70s.
Yeah.
It's like the soft core that the government will allow you to have, at least in America. Some countries you can get arrested for having that book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even think I've ever seen that like a book like that come in at work. I'm curious if that would be something that we would be allowed to resell.
There's a lot of stuff like that, which I imagine places like your place avoid, like the Turner Diaries and shit like that, if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
It's a white supremacy story. Like it was, what's his name? From Timothy McVeigh had a copy on.
Oh, sure.
It was written by the dude who's one of the white zeitgeist assholes. That's like a white supremacist guy.
Yeah. Okay. So between 11:14 and 11:22, Eric and Dylan leave their cars and walk into the school's cafeteria, and they're each carrying very large duffel bags that contain enough explosives to kill the majority of the people should they go off. At 11:14, the school custodian goes into the video room to change the surveillance videotape. At 11:17, after placing the two 20-pound propane tanks, like those fuckers are heavy, Eric and Dylan go back out to the student parking lot into their respective cars and wait for the bombs to explode. Okay, so from the cars, they have a clear view of the cafeteria area. Based on comments Eric and Dylan made in their homemade videotapes, the investigation determined the two planned to shoot any surviving students able to escape from the cafeteria.
Where's this from?
This is actually from
CNN.
Yeah, this is from CNN. At about 11:19, so a lunch is already in progress. About 600 students are in the cafeteria, having sat down, gotten their lunch. And at around 11:19, witnesses hear one of the suspects say, "Go, go, go!" And then Eric and Dylan pull out their shotguns, and then they begin shooting semi-automatic weapons from that they were hitting in their trench coats, because they were wearing their long trench coats, because they were part of the trench coat mafia, when really they weren't. But the media would totally latch on to that.
Yeah, one of them had a Tech 9, right? And the other one had a little 9mm carbine.
Yeah. The first gunshots were fired toward the west doors. They kill Rachel Scott and injure Richard Castillo, who are students. Rachel and Richard had been sitting on the grass eating their lunch outside the school's west upper entrance near the north side of the library. So there was like 5 students outside that got hurt. So Rachel and Danny were both killed outside. So Danny Roborough was killed.
We apologize for butchering people's names.
Yeah, I am so sorry, guys. So students Danny Roborough, Sean Graves, and Lance Kirkland were just outside the door of the school cafeteria on their way to the smokers pit at Clement Park, and they were hit by gunfire. And at first, it's like, I remember reading in Columbine, and I don't know if it was these two or if it was like 2 other people, but like they thought it, like everyone thought that this was a joke. They always...
Yeah, like paintball.
Yeah!
Like paintball guns. Like there's a teacher that's like, oh, they're shooting a video or something. This kid's pointing a BB gun at me, and she only realized that it was a real gun when she looked and saw the hole in the glass. Like,
yeah.
How oblivious do you have to be to who you are?
But yeah, during this whole time, it took a very long time before people realized like what was actually going on. And so with this being like the first major televised massacre, huge amounts of misinformation. Danny's shot and killed practically instantly. Sean Graves, he does live.
Yeah.
He gets shot in the back, but he will end up regaining his ability to walk. Now, Lance...
Is that where the janitor pulled him near the door and told him to play dead?
Yeah.
And some student stepped on him?
Yeah. And then...
Like, sorry, dude, or sorry, bro.
Yeah, I remember reading that, yeah. With Lance Kirkland, though, his is just fucking tragic, too. He got shot like 5 times. And he gets shot, and then he sees someone, and he's laying there, and then he says someone, and he's like, can you help me?
Yeah.
And then he's like, yeah, I'll help you. And it's fucking Dylan with his shotgun. He shoots him in the face. And Lance ends up surviving. And he like, his whole, like, left side, like, ear, that whole portion got kind of shot off. And when you see him today, he looks like, you can tell that he went through something tragic, but I don't think you would ever know that he had a shotgun go off in his face.
I haven't looked up any of the as adults, the kids that lived.
Yeah, it's crazy. With last year being the 20th anniversary, they did like a lot of 20-year anniversary documentaries and things like that, which were really just interesting to listen to and watch and kind of see and hear how everyone's doing. So those were the people that were outside. Now, okay, so already we have Rachel Scott, who's dead, and then Danny Rober, who's also outside dead. Now, unfortunately, their bodies will remain outside for 28 hours. And when the images were... So the media, it took about 30 minutes from when the first shot happened to the police being notified, for the police coming there, for the media to finally come and do that, or to be there. So it took about 30 minutes, and then the media gets there. Now, the media has, like, helicopters and everything going around eventually, and then when you see, like, a body on the sidewalk, that's Danny. And it was really hard to read how when the SWAT teams, the EMTs, try to go in to, like, get Lance and get Sean out, as soon as they realized that Rachel, like, they even picked up Rachel, but as soon as they realized that she was dead, they left her on the grass. And then as soon as they realized that Danny was dead, they just left him. And they were outside for 28 hours.
That is pretty horrendous. But at the same time, you got to imagine they're like, well, we can't help them. We got to move. Like, we got to look for people that are alive.
Right. I understand, like, the whole triage, but I get that. But it is inexcusable to keep bodies outside in the elements for 28 hours and not even cover them up.
Oh, they didn't even cover them?
They didn't even cover them up. This whole thing was a complete fucking shit show.
Yeah.
And, like, I mean, I'm not even a parent, but if I was a parent, I would be fucking pissed. So the 5 students are on the grass west of the stairs, and they're shot at, and they begin to run from the gunfire. Michael Johnson suffers gunshot wounds, but is able to reach the outdoor athletic storage shed, where he takes cover with others. Mark Taylor suffers a debilitating gunshot wound and falls to the ground, unable to flee with the others. Dylan goes back inside down the stairs to an area outside the cafeteria and shoots Danny again at close range, killing him instantly. He also shoots Lance Kirkland again, this time at close range, but Lance survives. Dylan briefly enters the side entrance to the cafeteria and stands just inside the doorway, trying to figure out maybe why the bombs haven't exploded. Because by this time, like, the 2 big bombs should have gone off. And so finally they're like, well, what the fuck's going on? Then Eric shoots down the stairways, hitting Anne-Marie Hochhalter. So Anne-Marie is shot multiple times, and she ends up becoming paralyzed. And actually, her mother ends up committing suicide about 6 months after the events. But to say... she was diagnosed bipolar. Her mother was dealing with depression for many years, but this was obviously, I think, a big tripping factor.
Right.
And then this is when witnesses hear one of the gunmen shout, "This is what we always wanted to do. This is awesome." So all of the shooting that happened outside, with the 5 being shot, Rachel and Danny dying, and then Anne-Marie and Mark Taylor being shot and paralyzed, that happened within the span of 5 minutes.
Right.
So,
because by 25 after, they were shooting with sheriff's deputies?
Yeah. Jefferson County Sheriff's Deputy Neil Gardner was the community resource officer at Columbine High School. He has just finished his lunch while sitting in his patrol car at the student's smoker's pit when he receives a call from the school custodian on the school radio. and he's needed back at the back lot of the school. So this is at 11:22. A 911 call from a Columbine school student reports a girl injured in the south lower parking lot of the high school. I think she's paralyzed, the caller tells the dispatch, and that's at 11:23. And that's actually one of the sub-chapters in the book is Female Down. Deputy Major is on his way. Major, that's
a motorcycle cop?
Yes. So when the call goes out, all these local municipalities just spring forward and come forward. So like the response time was really good, but
they didn't go inside.
They didn't go inside for 3 hours.
It's one of those things with cops where it's like it's one of those things where it's like, I want to preface this by saying cops have a very dangerous job.
Yes, absolutely.
And, it's one of those things where sometimes they don't always get the respect that's due, but there's a lot of reasons for that. So
the main fuck up here, if I'm gonna say there was a fuck up, it was the sheriff, the county sheriff, because he was the one that was quote unquote in charge, and he's not a cop. He's an elected official. And once the Metro Police found out that Sheriff Stone was going to be in charge, they're like, are you fucking kidding me? So he is a big proponent. And imagine him, folks, as Donald Trump. He is, if you go through and you read Columbine, he's the person who is talking to the media when he should not be talking to the media. He's giving false information saying that there was 3 shooters and that there's like 25 killed and like all this crazy fucking information that he had no basis to be giving. So he is the Donald Trump of this whole fucking operation. He and his underperson, both elected officials, neither one of them actual cops.
But like what I was saying before,
going
back, is that like, you hear about these situations where, like, what was it, Sandy Hook, I think, or was it the Parkland school shooting?
Yeah.
Where the cops didn't go inside. The cops showed up, and they waited for other people to come too before they went. And it's like, I think people have sued various police departments, and like, there's been there's been like court rulings that say police are not obligated to protect, like, to help you.
The fuck?
Yes, they're not under obligation to put their lives on the line to save somebody. Yeah, this is after the Parkland shooting. Okay. This is from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. Mm-hmm. A federal judge says Broward schools and sheriff's office had no legal duty to protect students during the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. U.S. District Judge Beth Bloom dismissed a suit filed by 15 students who claimed they were traumatized by the crisis in February. Mm-hmm. The suit named 6 defendants, including the Broward School District and the Broward County Sheriff's Office, including that cop. There was like 6 weeks from retirement.
And he did absolutely nothing.
Judge Bloom ruled that the 2 agencies had no constitutional duty to protect students who were not in custody.
Jesus Christ.
The claim arises from the actions of shooter Nicholas Cruz, a third party and not a state actor. Thus, the critical question the court analyzes is whether defendants had a constitutional duty to protect plaintiffs from the actions of Cruz. As previously stated, for such a duty to exist on the part of the defendants, plaintiffs would have to be considered in custody. For example, prisoners or patients of a mental ward. So because they hadn't arrested him yet, they were under no obligation to protect the students from kids shooting them.
Well, it sounds like, the way I took that, is that the students themselves would have to have been arrested by the police in order to get their protection.
Well, but you got to remember, too, this is a newspaper article, and they probably are trying to...
Oh, for sure, absolutely.
To push up a story that looks big. But bottom line, and Parkland is one of the more recent ones that I remember, but that's not the first time I've heard that police are not under any legal obligation to protect people, like to put their lives at risk to help people.
But the whole protect and serve thing, though, it's just, oh god, that's for a whole fucking other episode.
Well, and that's why it's a very touchy subject. No matter how you look at it, it's not black and white. It's definitely a gray topic.
Right. Okay, so I remember I wrote down some thoughts while I was reading this, and so one of the things that I found interesting is that there is a difference between hostage situations and non-hostage situations. So when the events of Columbine were first unraveling, people were saying that it was a hostage situation. And to the normal person, you would think that humans held at gunpoint equals hostages, but that's apparently not true. In a hostage situation, the takers know that they can only achieve their goal if they keep the hostages alive, so they will act rationally.
Right.
Whereas non-hostage gunmen do not. They don't act rational. They tend to act in an emotional and often self-destructive way, and will typically not issue a demand. In these situations, the murder-suicide outcome is incredibly high. So it's how these two situations are handled that makes it very important for the FBI to know what they're dealing with. When you have hostages, the police force is highly visible, and they make the gunmen work for everything. Whereas in a non-hostage situation, the police keep a very low profile and avoid the implications that anyone but the gunman is in control. With hostages, the goal is to lower expectations. Non-hostage crisis is to lower emotions. What's interesting is that when this happened, there was a very notable FBI agent who was infamous for his hostage negotiations. Like, he worked in Waco, he did a lot of other things, and he was actually living in Colorado, and he had a son who was going to Columbine. So when this whole thing happened, he drove up, and he offered his services. And because a lot of times, I guess, the local police officers don't usually like when the FBI gets involved. So he, offered his services, do you want my assistance here? And then they were like, yes, absolutely. So Agent Fusler, he was the FBI agent who did... Fusler, okay, yes, Fusler.
Okay, it's so funny. You've been looking for the stupid name.
You fucking knew it.
And as soon as you said it, I'm like, wait, no, that's not right. How ridiculous is that?
Well, at least you knew who I was talking about. Because it's interesting, because we talked briefly about Waco last episode, and he was the hostage negotiation for Waco, and we know how well that ended up. But what that ended, they did not intend for what happened to happen. I don't think anybody could foresee. I mean, well, that's a whole different story. Yeah, that's a whole different episode.
Let's not open that can of worms.
Right. Boy, we've already been talking for damn near over half an hour now, and we're only within the first 10 minutes.
It's pretty ridiculous how much, when you start looking into such a brief period of time.
Right.
Well, I mean, we're talking about it 20 years later, and it's, 45 minutes that impacted millions of people and still does to this day.
Absolutely.
And it's weird, because we're talking about what happened around 11:25 in the morning, right?
Yeah.
So that means we're talking about, for the last hour or whatever, half hour, we've been talking about 10 minutes worth of somebody's day. You know what I mean? It's just crazy.
Which I think is why we're going to be doing a part 1 and part 2 on this.
Oh, okay.
So I think we're going to be probably wrapping this one up, because what I want to do in the next part is talk about the end tail of it, and then the library, and then when the SWAT finally goes in. Yeah. Which is going to be, It's unfortunately, we're just building. And
something to look forward to.
I guess, yeah. So I guess, just to briefly recap, within the first 5 minutes of Eric and Dylan actually firing and opening up their guns at the school, they've shot and killed 2 people and wounded about 5 others at this point. The fire alarms, I don't believe, have gone off yet. There have maybe been 1 or 2 pipe bombs, but none of the big explosions have happened.
It's crazy for me to think that they threw a couple of their pipe bombs, and that most of the kids in the school were just sitting in class.
Right.
There's just something about that I can't wrap my head around.
It blows our mind because of what happened and the reaction that the kids had and how it was handled. This is why Columbine is considered the gold standard for how schools and people respond to this stuff now. Yeah. Schools across the nation have a zero tolerance policy. Oh, yeah. I think that's probably a good place to wrap up, don't you think?
I agree, but you got to admit there's really no good place to wrap this up.
No.
And, it's one of those... We're talking about this because of the impact on us personally. Right. But I would like to say to the people that have been affected by this, you know what I mean? There's really nothing... what do you say?
There's nothing to say.
And it's That's why it's one of those. This is a conversation that's not a comfortable conversation.
No.
But it is one that I think is worth having.
Well, it just goes with death and grief to begin with. Like they're uncomfortable conversations because like no one wants to talk about someone's dead loved one,
right? Because
they feel like it's gonna, by bringing them up, it's gonna cause pain. When in reality, most often it does not. I mean, right. Yes, they're gonna cry, they're gonna be emotional, but that's to be expected. But if anything,
but that makes people uncomfortable.
Exactly, because we don't know how to process that, and we just grew up in that society where emotions, for the most part, are not.
Like, I hate to go back to coronavirus, but one of my coworkers, his 71-year-old uncle died, and his 22-year-old cousin, who he said was on his way to the NFL, both died of this within the last week.
22-year-old?
22 years old.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I don't think he's from Wisconsin. I think he's from down south, but it's like, just, you know what I mean? It's just, it's just one of those things where it's just the next few months, I think, are going to, at least, I think this has really brought people back to reality in certain ways.
Yeah.
Like, we just kind of find things to occupy our time, and we look for things to be outraged about.
Sure.
And it's like, people are dying. I don't know. It's not good, but if there's a silver lining in it, I hope that it's how people engage one another.
I hope so too. I mean, I find myself being furloughed and basically just staying at home, with the exception of going to the grocery store, to your place. I don't watch the news so much. I mean, I'll occasionally check in, around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock to get like an update. But I feel so detached from like what's going on that it almost doesn't seem like this is actually happening.
Right.
So it's this weird thing, but I think this is where we're gonna...
Heavy sigh.
I know, heavy sigh. Yes, very much so.
This is a very mentally tasked.
Which is exactly why I just want to get this done and over with.
I do not blame you.
Right. And it's so weird because I feel like we've talked about so much in regards to Columbine, but I feel like we haven't talked about anything.
Well, it's one of those words, I mean, like the hillside strangle. I mean, there's a few when you say something,
right?
It puts an image in your head,
right?
Like Jeffrey Dahmer,
right?
Marilyn Manson,
right?
Or Marilyn Charles Manson.
Charles Manson.
Well, remind me, we got to talk about Marilyn Manson in the next one.
Yeah.
Columbine,
right?
9/11, O.J. Simpson,
right?
There's there's just thoughts and feelings behind it. When you say the hillside stranglers, you're like, I've heard that before,
right?
And you have a thing about it,
mm-hmm.
but this is different,
right?
Some of it because of the media coverage for years and years later.
Right. Well, I think this is so different too, and I know I keep bringing this up, but this is like the first thing that you and I have covered that we've both lived through. Like, we both remember where we were. Anywho, so yeah, guys, I think this is where we're going to stop for today. Let me know what you guys are thinking about so much about the series so far.
I realize this has been very different from a lot of the things you've done in the past.
Yeah.
But it feels different.
Very much so, which is why I think I'm a little, I don't want to say uptight, but I think this is why I'm getting so emotional about it and so stressed out about it. Because I'm not in control, because I don't have the script, and you and I are going back and forth, so it's just a whole bunch of things that are going on.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping that for next month in May, it's going to be a lot easier. It's definitely, I feel like it's going to be a lot more scripted going forward next month, just because there will be more concise things for me to write about.
Right.
Whereas there's just so much information here about Columbine.
Yeah.
Especially 20 years after the fact.
Oh, yeah.
The reports themselves, after the report was finally released, it was, close to 100,000 pages. Yeah. 90,000, I think.
It's gotta be something like the Unabomber.
Yeah, I can imagine. Or, Oklahoma City bombing.
Yeah.
So. But, yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Really appreciate all of you guys, just taking the time to listen. Please continue to share Murder is My Sign with your friends any way they can. Be sure to share Murder is My Sign with anyone you can, any way that you can. You can find Murder is My Sign on your favorite podcasting platforms or your favorite podcasting app. You can always connect with me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Jordy Death. That's Jordy Death. or you can always email the show directly at murderismysignpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to go above and beyond and join the Boneyard, you can do so at patreon.com/murderismysign. You can become a Boneyard backer or a death head, just like my fabulous patrons Jake, Holly, Michelle, and Crystal. Thank you guys again so much for your continued support. It really means a lot to me. Other than that, I say it for the last couple of episodes, please make sure you're taking care of yourself. You're staying home if you can, washing your hands. Don't be nasty. Wash your hands. And cover your cough and all that good stuff. But until next time, guys, take care of yourself and each other, and rest in peace.